Many view the relationship between the French people and their love to revolt very similar to that of bread and butter. And in the first half of the 19th century, this was very much the case. Although nothing could compare to the revolts of the 1790s, in 1830, Paris was swept by revolutionary fervor and was on the brink of exploding into another mass revolt against the monarch. With the deposition of Napoleon in 1815, the royal house of Bourbon was once again restored, and with it the monarch. The difference was that after witnessing how willing the people of France were to revolt against an absolute monarch, Louis XVIII began to alter his view of the position. Though he did purge many Bonapartists from the government, he maintained the spirit of liberalism and egalitarianism that Napoleon had helped instill into the French people, and was a willing partner in the new constitutional monarchy. The future of France looked bright. Unfortunately, Louis enjoyed bacon, beer, and all the unhealthy foods you can imagine a little bit too much. And he died from a mixture of obesity, gout, and gangrene in 1824. And it really was unfortunate, because that led the way for this guy to become king. Charles X was the leader of the ultra-royalist faction in French politics, supporting divine right to rule and the absolutism of kingship. So when he took over, he immediately began shoring up these principles. If you can't really see where this is going, just remember the last guy to try this ended up with both his and his wife's heads cut off in a public square. Charles began passing laws that seem crazy today, such as making sacrilege a capital crime and trying to pass male-only inheritance laws. On top of supremely unpopular and heavy-handed lawmaking, he also ordered the government to pay out money to nobles who had lost land during the entirety of the French Revolution, putting France in heavy debt.
I am never going to financially recover from this.
As a way of trying to curry favor with the people through military conquest, Charles decided to invade Algeria. But this involved little more than French troops occupying the territory and deposing the sitting king. By June of 1830, Charles was widely mocked in newspapers, by people on the streets, and in the chambers of the French government. Recent failures of elections had created a standstill in the government that prevented the addressing of any problems. So in July, Charles had the idea to suspend the Constitution, impose censorship of the press, and change the electoral system to a way that favored his royalists more. The people had enough. There were protests in the King Gardens at St. Cloud, riots in the streets of Paris were sparked by police raids on newspapers, and all the while the National Guard militia had been disbanded, yet not disarmed. So hundreds of armed soldiers were just wandering the streets, and had even attacked and seized control of Versailles. Everywhere Charles looked, people were shouting, "À bas les Bourbons," down with the Bourbons, and flying the revolutionary and illegal tricolor. Finally, Charles received word that the rioters were preparing to attack his residence, and he accepted his fate. He submitted to a weak constitutional monarchy, but by August 2nd, he abdicated with his son, giving up all rights to the throne and allowing his cousin to take over as Louis Philippe I. The revolt was both small in scope and short, especially considering the massive change it brought about. Its localization to Paris meant that many in the countryside were completely unaware of the changes made by it until months later, creating issues and fractures that would snowball until they exploded in 1848. Yet for now, France was stabilized, and the great powers breathed a sigh of relief. Just to the north, issues were brewing in the Netherlands. The Flemish and Wallonian peoples of the south were finding themselves continually at odds with their Dutch leaders, and unrest was beginning to spike. Making matters worse, the southern region was populated by mostly Roman Catholics, in contrast with the mostly Protestant north. This, combined with high levels of unemployment and the people viewing King William I as a despotic ruler, eventually caused tensions to flare up past the breaking point. On August 25, 1830, during a showing of the Dutch patriotic play La Muette de Portici, riots broke out in the city of Brussels. The mob quickly grew in size as people left the theaters, and talks of secession began to spread like wildfire. The mob gained control of governmental buildings and looting was widespread. King William I sent his two sons, Crown Prince William and Prince Frederick, to quell the rebellion and put an end to the rioting. Over the next few days, the violence escalated, and it quickly became obvious the riots were turning into another full-blown revolution. In Brussels, the people rallied around a newly created flag of Belgium, tied to a standard with shoelaces, and successfully countercharged the forces of Prince William. Dutch forces slowly began withdrawing from the city as the southern Flemish and Wallonian recruits deserted en masse to join the mob. Prince William was requested to come into the city alone by the burghers of Brussels, which he did despite the risks. He was soon convinced the only viable option was a split between the north and the south, and sent these thoughts to his father, King William I, on the 1st of September. William I rejected the terms, and had Prince Frederick attempt to take the city of Brussels by force. The bloody street fighting that occurred from September 23rd to the 26th ended in a revolutionary victory, with the Dutch unable to take control of the city. With a successful defense of the city accomplished, the revolutionaries declared independence on October 4th, 1830. King William quickly requested help from the great powers of Europe, who were unable to come to any concrete decision. While many of the nations opposed Belgian independence, they were unable to properly support the Dutch armies. By 1839, the great powers had eventually decided to accept Belgian independence, and on the 19th of April of that year, the Treaty of London was signed, confirming Belgian sovereignty and affirming its neutrality. This treaty would remain in effect until Germany broke it in August of 1914. One of the leading reasons Russia was unable to offer its assistance to the Dutch King William was due to the sudden and violent series of uprisings that occurred in the Russian-controlled Kingdom of Poland in November of 1830. The autonomy of the Kingdom of Poland had been slowly chipped away by the Russian Tsar Alexander I since the Congress of Vienna had ended, and the Polish people were beginning to see revolution as the only viable option to keep their freedom. Things exploded into all-out revolution when Tsar Nicholas I planned to send a Polish army to suppress the Belgian Revolution. On the 29th of November 1830, an armed conflict broke out in Warsaw led by a young cadet from Poland's officer school, Piotr Wysocki. Taking arms from the garrison, they assaulted the Belvedere Palace. An official government was created on the 29th of January, and Russia invaded on February 4th. Unfortunately for the revolutionaries, the timing wasn't great, and instead of the war kicking off when Russia was busy dealing with Turkey 2 years prior, the revolt started with Russia free to send the majority of its armies to deal with the Polish rebels. Over the next few months, the Polish forces would see some small successes against Russian forces much larger than their own on the field. However, the Russian forces were far too numerous to be contained, and they surrounded Warsaw in early September 1831, securing the suburb of Wola on the 6th, and by the evening of the 7th, the garrison had either fled the city or surrendered, signaling an end to the Polish government that had been established less than 8 months prior. On October 6th, the remaining 20,000-strong Polish army crossed the border into Prussia and laid down their arms, rather than surrender to the Russians. With the rebellion snuffed out, Nicholas I dissolved the Kingdom of Poland, and fully integrated the provinces into the Russian Empire. Poland would remain fractured, split between 3 empires, until its re-establishment during the First World War. Taking a look down to the southwest, once again Italian unrest was growing, and became emboldened after the Duke of Modena, Francis IV, declared that he would not act against those who supported the unification of Italy. Inspired by events in France, and encouraged by the French King Louis Philippe, who threw his support behind an Italian uprising, insurrections began popping up all over the peninsula. The largest singular revolt was in Modena, headed by Ciron Menotti. Pressured by Metternich, Louis Philippe decided not to intervene, and the insurrections began to falter. The first to fall was that in Modena. Betrayed by Francis IV, Menotti was executed on the 23rd of May, 1831. The other rebellions were more successful for a small period of time, planning to create the Provinci Italiani Uniti. Concerned about the rebel success, Pope Gregory XVI called upon Austrian assistance to put the revolt down, and it quickly was. The leaders were executed, and the flames of Italian unification were seemingly snuffed out completely. However, constant Austrian intervention only made the next revolt far worse and far more effective. Europe would settle into almost 2 decades of complete stability. The flames of revolution were seemingly put out for good. The constant revolts, both big and small, would soon become a distant memory for some, until the unrest among the lower classes and ethnic groups within the various nations became too great to be ignored. And Europe was once again thrown into another spout of putting out the flames of revolution across the continent. France would become an empire, Germany would temporarily unify, and Metternich would be tossed out. A new era of the concert of Europe was about to begin, and no one had taken notice. Thank you for watching this episode of Lighting the Powder Keg. The next episode will take a look at the revolutions of 1848 and the rise of another Napoleon. Special thank you to my awesome Patreon backers for supporting this channel. If you'd like to see more, please consider subscribing to my channel, and please be sure to share your thoughts or feedback with me in the comments below. You can keep up with me through my Discord or Instagram, and if you want to support what I'm doing, you can check out my Teesprings shop and Patreon linked in the description below.